Hello, everyone. I'm R. Blank, and welcome to another episode of the Healthier Tech Podcast, a podcast about a healthier approach to living alongside modern technology. So today we're welcoming human biologist Gary Brecka, who runs the Streamline Medical Group at streamlinemedicalgroup.com. Now, I'd actually never heard of Gary before. Our producer James mentioned him to me as we were planning episodes. I did some checking, and his work sounds amazing.
We have the absence of certain raw materials. And as these raw material deficits continue and perpetuate in the human body, what happens is we continue to accept an ever eroding and decreasing baseline sense of normalcy.
Gary graduated from Frostburg State University with a Bachelor of Science degree in biology and postgraduate education in human biology. His specialty is reviewing human blood work, finding the root of your symptoms and deficiencies, then guiding you through your customized therapy. But I suspect after we get through this interview, we're all going to realize how deceptively humble that description is, because Gary's approach to building and maintaining health is very powerful. Before we begin, a brief word. This podcast is brought to you by my company, Shield Your Body, where it is our mission to help make technology safer for you and your loved ones to enjoy. Inspired by the life's work of my father, Dr. Martin Blank, one of the world's leading EMF scientists, I founded Shield Your Body in 2012, and we provide a ton of great and free resources for you to learn all about EMF radiation, like articles, ebooks, webinars, videos, and this podcast. And we also have a world-class catalog of laboratory-tested EMF and 5G protection products. From our phone pouch and laptop pad, all the way up to our bed canopy, all of our shielding products are laboratory tested and include a lifetime warranty. Learn more about our products, why we have hundreds of thousands of satisfied customers around the world at shieldyourbody.com. That's shieldYourBody, all one word, .com. And use promo code POD to save 15% on your first order with free shipping throughout North America and Europe. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So let's get started. Welcome, Gary. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So to get started, I know that you have a formal training in biology and human biology, and I apologize if this is a bit basic, but could you please explain a bit about what the study of human biology actually is and how you got into it?
Sure. My undergraduate degrees are in biology, and then my postgraduate degrees are in human biology. And human biology is the study of the human body, but at a very, very deep visceral level, meaning the interconnectivity between the deepest root in the soil and the highest leaf in the tree. And one of the challenges with modern medicine is we don't often go back to the way that the human body really operates and look at whether or not someone's physiology is intact before we adorn them with a diagnosis of pathology or disease. So the study of human biology is the deep study of biology related to human beings. So everything from nutrition to how we think, to how our brain operates, to how our gut works, to how genes impact our health, to our blood, and everything in between. If it has to do with the human body, it's covered under the human biology science.
So that sounds, not to put too broad a term on it, but it sounds like a very holistic approach to human health and human existence. Is that right?
It's a very holistic approach to human health and human existence, but more importantly, it's a very practical approach, because what it does is it gives us the insight to be able to look at what's potentially broken before we replace it. Because if we have a good fundamental understanding of how human biology works, then when the body is challenged, we can go back to these physiologic processes in the human body and we can see if they're intact. I'll give you a quick example.
Yeah.
Arguably, the most important single nutrient in the human body is vitamin D3. Cholecalciferol, it's the only vitamin that a human being can make on their own. There's not a single cell in the entire human body that does not have a receptor site for this vitamin. And it's magnanimously important for immune function, for bone health, for brain, for optimal cognitive function, for repair from exercise. Just imagine how important a nutrient is to a human being if it's the only nutrient that a human being can make on our own. And this nutrient lies at the deepest tip of the root of the tree. And as it becomes deficient, you get pathology and disease, and you get exacerbation of other symptoms up the roots and into the trunk and into the leaves. So, for example, a clinical deficiency in vitamin D3 over a prolonged period of time will actually manifest itself exactly like rheumatoid arthritis. The symptoms are absolutely superimposable in parallel. But you don't have rheumatoid arthritis, you actually have a clinical deficiency in vitamin D3. So a human biologist will trace the presence of the symptom and find the deepest area of the root where that problem, potentially started.
So that I actually had no idea about that. That was a very interesting answer. But vitamin D3 in particular, I had no idea about the unique characteristics and the role that it plays in our health. That's no really question. Interesting.
And COVID has really helped bubble this to the surface because 60% of all hospitalizations for COVID were in patients that were clinically deficient in vitamin D3. The CDC, the last time I checked, which was about a week ago, still had not reported a single COVID death on a patient with a vitamin D3 level above 34 nanograms per deciliter. And that's at any age.
Wow.
And, they say that COVID, for example, disproportionately affects minorities. And that's true. But it's not because they're minorities. It's because of the pigment of their skin. That population of dark pigment has about 85% of that population is clinically deficient in vitamin D3. And the absence of vitamin D3 is the presence of poor immune function. And so we're unable to battle viruses and other pathogens as readily as we would be if, we had adequate levels of vitamin D3.
Wow. My mother actually told me when COVID started, we went into lockdown. She's like, stock up on D3. And I've been taking it pretty reliably. But now I really understand why. So thank you.
She's a smart woman.
So I have a lot of questions I want to get to. But there's one I kind of want to start with because I was listening to this interview you did with my producer, James, about a year ago. And there was this quote. And I loved it. And I just kind of want you to riff off of it if you could. There's a superhuman locked inside of all of us. Could you tell us what you mean by that?
That is absolutely positively true. Human beings are meant to thrive. We're meant to have clean, clear waking energy, deep delta wave of sleep, a healthy response to exercise. We're meant to have good, clean cognitive function, an excellent short-term recall. We're meant to have healthy, strong libidos and balanced mood. But what happens in a human body, in human beings is as we get older, and even sometimes when we're younger, we have the absence of certain raw materials. And as these raw material deficits continue and perpetuate in the human body, what happens is we continue to accept an ever eroding and decreasing baseline sense of normalcy. The best example I have is if you, the last time you had a stomach flu, and after you peeled yourself off the bathroom floor and slept it off for 6 hours, when you woke up, you said, "Oh my God, I feel amazing." And the truth is you really didn't feel amazing. You just felt normal. But because of the perspective that you had, normal felt so incredibly good that you really learned to appreciate normal. That distance between the bathroom floor and waking up after sleeping off a stomach virus is the same distance that most of us right now listening to this podcast are from true baseline sense of normalcy. You have no idea what a beautiful machine the human body is. And if you just give it the raw materials that it needs to do its job and get out of its way, it is astounding what happens in the human biome. So most of us have a short-term recall that's not quite as sharp as we'd like it to be. We're not getting good, deep, restful delta wave of sleep on a regular basis. In most adults over 35 years old, libido has left the building or very rarely comes into the building. Our response to exercise is not what it used to be. Our cognitive function is not what it used to be. And so all of these things are the presence of these symptoms is just the absence of raw material. And so when I say there's a superhuman locked inside of every single one of us, what I mean is if you are able to optimize your levels of certain key nutrients, which we'll talk about today, balance your blood sugar, optimize your hormone levels, just those three pillars alone would skyrocket you to a baseline sense of normalcy that you never, ever thought was possible.
So I think you actually started to answer my next question, but I'll ask it anyway. Which is, are there a set of sort of standard raw materials that most people are lacking, or is it different for everybody? And you started by saying that it breaks down into nutrients, blood sugar, and hormone levels. Blood
Yes.
sugar, I think, that would be similar components, measured the same way across, different people. But, when you're talking about people missing nutrients or their hormone production isn't the same, are you seeing the same sorts of missing nutrients and hormone production across larger populations, or is it really more of an individual, unique to each individual?
Yes, we're seeing massive challenges with blood sugar regulation, with nutrient deficiencies, and with hormone balance across the vast majority of the population. When I was in population mortality, which I was in for almost 20 years, I was a mortality expert. So if I got a hold of 5 years of your medical records and 5 years of demographic data, I could tell the insurance company how long you had to live to the month. And that was easy if we had an 85-year-old with a terminal illness, or a 75 or 80-year-old female that was on a boatload of pharmaceutical compounds. But what if you had a 30-year-old female or 25-year-old male that felt great, that looked great, that had perfect blood work, hadn't been to the doctor in their entire life, had no aches and pains? How do you decide how long that person has left on Earth? So what we did was we worked backwards. We said, every human being meets their demise exactly the same way. So we will all eventually leave the earth the very same way, because the definition of death is hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. But we tend to think of it as an event, like a bus or a gunshot wound or a heart attack, but it's actually not an event. It's a long, slow process that begins in our early 20s and doesn't end until we close our eyes for the last time. And the steepness of that curve has a lot to do with three particular areas of optimal health. And these are so important. I really hope that people listen in and even write these down. Because as we studied 370 million lives to come up with a mortality model, we consistently saw the deficits in these three areas as the leading indicator of optimal health, of lifespan, and also of health span. And the first one was nutrient deficiencies, basic nutrient deficiencies. And I'll give you the big three. Vitamin D3, cholecalciferol. Clinical deficiency in this vitamin just wreaks absolute havoc on the human body in just about every system in the body. I could do an entire podcast just on vitamin D3, but that deficiency over a prolonged period of time was one that we would actually use to accelerate your mortality. And the second two were B12, methylcobalamin, a methylated form of folic acid called folate, and DHEA. These nutrients, when they were absent, they affect so many organ systems, so many hormonal and endocrine systems, so much production of neurotransmitters, how food moves through our gut, our allergies, our sensitivities, our reactivities. So those deficiencies in those areas were paramount to us being able to determine how long somebody had left on Earth. And then the last two were hormone balance and glycemic control. Believe it or not, the Bible should say that sugar is the root of all evil, not the love of money, because I'm not really having any luck changing that. But the truth is that that sugar is a part of the disease etiological pathway of so many different diseases, it's hard to even describe. In fact, the UK and the United States are still some of the few countries in the world that continue to call Alzheimer's and dementia. Most countries call it what it is. It's type 3 diabetes. It's insulin resistance in the brain. In fact, in my entire tenure in the mortality space, I did not see a single patient, not one, that came through our model that had early onset Alzheimer's or dementia that did not have 10 years of elevated blood sugar prior to. Not a single instance. And so the controlling our sugar levels has a demonstrative impact on the function of the human body and how well we operate from an optimal perspective. And then the hormones, I could go into that as well. But beginning in our late 20s, we begin to have all sorts of accessory deficiencies in our body that drag our endocrine system down. Most of my hormone therapy clients, about 70% of them that need hormone therapy are actually not on hormone therapy. They're on nutrient therapy. We just put the raw material back into the human body and their hormones not only balance, but they elevate to the optimal range. We have a pandemic of low hormonal levels in this country. And it's not because everybody's endocrine system is quitting. It's because they lack certain raw materials.
Now, I don't know if we have enough data for you to answer this, but would someone who had a kind of a standard but healthy diet 100 or 200 years ago, would they have had more of these these accessory nutrients just implicitly in what they were eating?
Oh, no question. The last time that we did a soil lineage update on nutrients in our foods was 1941. So when we make lettuce or grow kale or potatoes or something like that, we have to update the macros. We have to update the carbohydrate content, the protein content, but we don't update the vitamin content, the nutrient content. That was last updated in 1941. And so when we say that an ounce of spinach has so much protein, it has so much vitamin A, so much vitamin C, so much iron, we're using a 1941 soil lineage study that is way outdated.
Wow.
And the truth is that our soil today really does not support healthy nutrients at the level that most human beings need.
Wow. Okay. So you really have a lot of information at your fingertips, and I'm just trying to digest as much as I can. And as I'm learning from you, my body isn't used to digesting complex molecules in the same way.
Fix your nutrient deficiencies, and then you'll be right up there with Einstein and the rest of us.
So, looking through your website at streamlinemedicalgroup.com, I noticed that it seems to me that there's a wide range of symptoms that your patients come to you to help treat, right? There's weight, there's energy, there's focus, there's metabolism, emotions, sleep. I might have missed some. So you're really, from what I can gather, you're really talking about fundamental mechanisms of human function, right? That are kind of just central to almost everything that we do.
Yes.
Is that? Yeah.
That's exactly it. And I'll give you a perfect example. Arguably the number one reason why patients come into one of our clinics is because they say that they're low on energy. So they say, Gary, I'm just tired. I'm not myself. I don't have that positive aggression towards working out. I'm not sleeping very deeply, and I don't feel like I have the energy that I had even 3 or 4 years ago. And so what I do is I convert what they say into physiology, right? So if you tell me that you're low on energy, physiologically what you're saying is I'm low on oxygen, right? Because oxygen in the human body equals energy. So if you told me, Gary, I had a lot of energy today, physiologically what you're saying is I had a lot of oxygen in my blood today. So if oxygen equals energy, which it does, then if I want to raise your energy level, I need to raise your blood oxygen. So the question is, how do we do that? Well, on a standard blood test, and it's amazing to me how many people have actually never had their blood checked. It's like a pilot at 39,000 feet with no actionable data on the dashboard, and it's data extremely relevant to your temple, to the body that's the vehicle that's going to propel you to be a successful entrepreneur or musician or actress or whatever your career is. And we sometimes don't even take the time to develop a dashboard of what's going on in our body. So if we look at energy and we look at oxygen in the human body, most of the patients that I see have a clinical deficiency or borderline deficiency in red blood cells. And red blood cells are like little tennis balls floating around the bloodstream that carry oxygen inside of them in a fluid called hemoglobin. So when the number of red blood cells in your bloodstream gets low, you're low on energy because you're low on oxygen. So the question is, why would I be low on red blood cells and low on this magic fluid inside called hemoglobin? Well, we're going to start working our way from the leaves down the branches into the trunk and then deep into the soil so that we can see how these nutrients that I'm talking about mean so much to just how much oxygen our blood can carry. So a red blood cell is made in the bone marrow. So the bone marrow goes through a process of making red blood cells and throwing them into the bloodstream. And if the bone marrow's production is low, well, then the number of red blood cells in our bloodstream is low. And if the number of red blood cells in our bloodstream is low, we're low on energy and we don't sleep very well and we have poor cognitive function. So what tells the bone marrow to produce red blood cells? Believe it or not, it's the hormone testosterone. In men and women, the primary role of testosterone is not male characteristics. The primary role of the hormone testosterone is to put pressure on the bone marrow to create new red blood cells. So if you're low on testosterone, then the signal is weak to the bone marrow. If the signal is weak to the bone marrow, you're low on red blood cells and hemoglobin. And if you're low on those, you're low on oxygen. So now the question becomes, what's testosterone made out of? Well, testosterone is made from the molecule DHEA. And the majority of my patients, especially under 50 years old, males and females that are clinically deficient in this hormone, have no endocrine dysfunction at all. They just lack raw materials. They simply lack raw materials.
So what I'm hearing from you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that's why I'm asking, but a huge amount of the issues you're seeing in people, whether it's weight, energy, focus, emotion, sleep, it all comes down to a lack of specific nutrients in our diet. Is that correct? Or is that just too simplified?
Either a lack of specific nutrients in our diet or a lack of raw materials, amino acids, vitamins that we normally would have been able to get from diet. But because of the lack of nutrients in our food supply, we're generally not. Now, the other issue that people face is that our genes code for some of the most important raw materials that human beings need. So, for example, our genetic code doesn't just determine what color our hair is and our eyes and our skin color and whether or not we have detached earlobes. It also codes for some of the most important raw materials in the human body. And there are 5 actionable genes that I particularly like to look at because these 5 genes supply the most important raw materials for human function, not the least of which are neurotransmitters, which balance our mood. So I'll give you a quick example. Let's take depression, the emotion depression. We define depression in this country as an inadequate supply of serotonin. Okay, that's the definition of depression. If you lack an adequate supply of serotonin, you're depressed. So the raw material that's missing is serotonin. But we never treat the supply. We take people who are low on serotonin and we put them on something called an SSRI, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So we actually take what little serotonin they have and we ration it. So by definition, it never raises serotonin. So by definition, it never ends depression, which is why I talk to patients all the time that say they've been on antidepressants for 16, 18, 20 years. And I always ask them, when did you think it was going to kick in? When did you think it was going to become an antidepressant? So if we understand that serotonin is made in the gut and that there's a gene that codes for the raw material that's needed to make serotonin, and if this gene is broken, it's called MTHFR, by the way. If this gene is broken, you lack the raw material to make the neurotransmitter serotonin, and therefore you're depressed. You don't have clinical depression, you just lack raw material. And as soon as you put this raw material back into the human body, this beautiful machine that we have starts to methylate and manufacture serotonin. And once it starts to manufacture serotonin, your depression eviscerates. Because the truth is, you never really had depression.
I think I'm starting to see a bit more flesh around the bone of what you meant by there's a superhuman locked inside of all of us. I'm reminded, I think it was Bill Clinton had a line, there's nothing wrong with America that can't be fixed by what's right with America. And what I'm hearing from you is there's nothing wrong with our body that can't be fixed by what's right with our body.
That is very, very true. And if we learn to first look for the missing raw material before we jumped to pathology and disease, you would see that we have a significant impact on human function.
This is. I mean, it really is a difference in paradigm between what you're talking about and what standard Western medical practice is about. And I don't mean to sound like like an alternative medicine guy, but I mean, that's what I'm hearing, that Western medicine is designed to treat symptoms of disease, whereas what your approach is effectively going after the precursors to give our bodies what the bodies need in order to achieve a healthier state. Is that a right way of thinking of this?
Yes, that's exactly right. We go on the search for raw material, and we look for the raw material that's missing that's going to eventually lead to pathology and disease or dysfunction. And so, a good mechanic, for example, doesn't really fix your car, right? A good mechanic keeps your car from breaking down, right? So, if you think about it, that's really what a good mechanic does. You pull in and he says, hey, your oil's dirty and you need transmission fluid and your windshield wiper fluid's low. And he replaces the raw material before the car breaks down. But oddly, we don't do this in the human body. We don't ask our body what it needs. Like, how can I help you? What are you deficient in? What could I supply to you that would help you do your job? And that's done through a blood test. But if you ask your body 63 to 68 biomarker questions and it gives you back a response, that response is not somebody's opinion. That response is exactly what your body needs to be optimal. And so the roadmap to optimal health is inside of every single one of us. It's not with your cousin or your uncle or your neighbor or your spouse. They don't know what's going on inside your bloodstream. They don't know what raw material you're deficient in. But if you develop a dashboard by getting a blood panel done, then you'll find exactly what's deficient in the human body. You supplement just for that deficiency, and it is absolutely incredible what happens to human function.
So, following through on this discussion of raw material, you and I chatted a little bit before the show, and in other episodes this season, we talk about tech addiction, which is it's a growing problem. Which me and Shield Your Body, we focus on a lot increasingly because of the impact of the resulting impact of EMF exposure. But one thing we've learned this season is there's a lot of negative impacts of tech addiction. And you were telling me that there's, with any addiction, like tech addiction, but any other, there's a direct relationship between a raw material supply. Is that right? Yes.
Just like everything else in the human body. If you give me a disease or a pathology or an emotional disorder, I can generally tell you what raw material is missing in the human body that's leading to that condition. And it's no different with addiction. The absence of dopamine is the presence of addiction. So the absence of dopamine is the presence of addiction. So what this means is that when we lack the raw material dopamine, then that receptor cries out for stimulation. And when the dopamine receptor cries out for stimulation, it begins the journey toward addiction. You see, most addicts didn't actually want to get high. Their initial impetus was not, I want to get high. Their initial impetus was, I want to feel normal. And in their search for normalcy, they became addicted. And then once they were addicted, they began running from a low, not running towards a high. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And this is why I feel, so I have a profound, I'm profoundly empathetic with a true addict, because it's not something that they can control, because this absence of dopamine causes them to seek this addictive behavior. And if you've known an addict or been an addict, generally what you'll find happens in most addicts is they actually never lose the addiction. It just moves, right? So drug addicts might become sex addicts. A sex addict might become a gambling addict. A gambling addict might become an exercise fanatic. But the deficit is still there, and therefore it's still driving addictive behavior. So if we understand that dopamine is also made in the human body, and it is made by one of the 5 actionable genes that I mentioned earlier, and if one of those genes is broken, we're not manufacturing adequate supplies of dopamine. And the absence of that raw material is what's leading to the presence of addiction. And so if we can locate, which we can, if we can look at this gene, and we can't fix the gene, but we can supplement for its function, we can replace the raw material that gene is responsible for putting into the human body. And when you replace that raw material, which is usually a combination of magnesium, zinc, L-methionine, methylated B vitamins, and 5-methylfolate in a certain combination, when you put those raw materials back into the human body, all of a sudden we begin to methylate dopamine again. And as we methylate dopamine, then the levels of dopamine rise and we no longer have that deficit. So
there's an aspect of any addiction, but tech addiction in particular that you believe is addressable by providing sufficient raw materials to the body. Am I correct in that? Or again, is that an oversimplification?
Yeah, that's not an oversimplification at all. If you think about it, the longer we spend on our phones or gaming or in front of these screens, checking social media, the more we get addicted because when we're engaged in that activity, we're getting a little ding of dopamine. We're getting a little reward, and it's that dopamine receptor is getting dinged. And the more that receptor is dinged by social media or by gaming or by technology, then the less sensitive it becomes. It's a process called tachyphylaxis. It's the very same reason that if you sit down next to a woman and you can smell her perfume, if you sit next to her for 30 minutes, you don't smell her perfume any longer. Mm-hmm. You've desensitized to that smell. And so what happens with technology, with gaming, with social media is it requires more and more and more stimulus in order to get that pleasure response from that interaction. And so this is why social media holidays and tech holidays are so beneficial. I mean, and all about EMFs. I mean, the benefits of taking a tech holiday from EMFs, it has a whole separate set. Mm-hmm. of beneficial consequences. But this behavior drives this deficit of dopamine and it becomes addictive. And that's why people generally spend more and more and more time on technology as time goes on. They don't spend less time. So
why, taking this approach, this treatment approach, why doesn't that just exacerbate the tech addiction, right? Because if you're enabling the body to make more dopamine, why doesn't that make it even more enjoyable to be to get those dopamine triggers from Facebook or whatever?
Oh, it does. It absolutely does. And that's why that's why their time increases on social media, and time increases on Facebook, and time increases with gaming, and time increases with interaction with these devices because of the pleasure signal that they get. You don't see the phone as a technology tool. You see the phone as a source of pleasure, a source of curiosity, a source of entertainment. And so you become very, very attached to it because your brain gets addicted to the signals that it provides. And this is no different than, looking at a young child who's capable of playing video games for 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day, which many young children are. These are children that very likely already have a significant deficit in the neurotransmitter dopamine. And that addictive behavior in the child is manifesting itself as gaming. And that's something to be very cautious of, because as that child heads towards adulthood, they're very, very susceptible to drug and alcohol addiction and other types of addictive behavior.
Are you seeing tech addiction in growing in your patient? Is it becoming something that you focus on treating more maybe than it used to be?
Oh, no question. Absolutely no question. And you treat it the same way that you treat anything else. We look for the raw material to balance the levels of dopamine so that you don't get so much pleasure from your phone. So you don't actually have to seek this electronic device in order to get this reward of dopamine.
Oh, now I understand the mechanism that you're doing. So when you provide sufficient raw materials as fuel, you're building up kind of a base level that relative to that, the dopamine hit you'd get from Facebook, it becomes less and less because your base level is higher. Is that right?
That's exactly correct.
Okay. What kind of success or outcomes have you seen with this type of treatment regimen for tech? Because this is really, because when I talk about tech addiction, and I'm not an expert on tech addiction, I try to learn as much as I can. And when I talk about it, a lot of it is about setting boundaries for your own behavior, making sure, even things like just don't bring the phone to the table or don't bring it to bed, or, just setting rules and baselines and following them. But you're talking about an entirely different type of approach here. So I'm wondering, what the results are that you see in your practice.
Well, they're profound. I mean, you're going right to the source. So take somebody who has a dopamine deficit, right? And you convince them that being away from their phone, not constantly checking social media or constantly being on Facebook or instant messaging or what have you, has magnanimous health benefits. Well, as they begin to separate from that phone, that deficit is still there. So they're still craving that dopamine reward. So if you want to make it easy on them, you use a two-pronged approach. You convince them, obviously, that it's not a healthy behavior and they would benefit from not being on the device so much. But you also provide them less of an impetus to be attracted back to that device. Because the truth is, if we do not fill in that void is still going to drive the behavior. It may not drive it to the phone, but it will eventually drive it somewhere else.
So, okay. So you've shared a tremendous amount of knowledge that I know is going to be new.
Sorry, I know I was laying a lot on
this
you.
is fantastic. And what I was going to say is that, I know that a lot of people listening to this, they're going to find, this to be new information and they're going to be really motivated. The problem, I imagine, is A, there's only one Gary Brecka, and two, Gary's located in Naples, Florida. The Streamline Medical Group is located in Naples, Florida. So if you're just kind of a normal person living in California or Iowa or wherever, and they're hearing this podcast, how is there a way for them to work with you without going all the way to Florida?
Well, yes. I mean, 70% of our patients have never been into our clinic. So we have physicians licensed in states all over America. So the caliber of care and the continuity of care is the same as if, I were to engage with you. So our clinical team, our doctors or nurses or nurse practitioners or PAs are some of the most skilled and highly trained professionals on the planet. And they all practice this wellness approach at helping us root out the raw material deficit in our body. So you don't have to live in Florida or even Naples, Florida to work with us. And as a matter of fact, we're opening offices as we speak in the UK and all throughout the Middle East, because this is a message that really needs to get out and touch the face of humanity.
That's fantastic. And if someone isn't located near an office, is it possible for them, maybe to go to their own doctor or lab nearby, get their blood work done, and then consult with you remotely?
Yes, you could go to any LabCorp in the entire country. And LabCorp boasts that there's a LabCorp within 2 miles of every emergency room in America. So that means that probably if you're listening to this podcast and you live in the United States, you are probably within just a few miles of a LabCorp. So you can go in there, have your blood drawn, and it will populate our system, and one of our clinicians will get on the phone with you and go through that dashboard and help you create a dashboard of supplements and raw materials. That's
fantastic. I'm really glad I asked that question because you had a really good answer for it. I mean, like you have for everything, but that's actionable for people.
I always like when I speak, I'll always just open it up to the audience and say, give me a condition, a pathology, a disease, something you're struggling with, and I'm going to root out the raw material. I'm going to take you from your symptom all the way deep into the human body and into the cell, and I'm going to tell you exactly what the root cause of that symptom, that pathology, that disease, that issue is, and what raw material is likely missing. And this has to do with emotional issues. Like I said, ADD, ADHD, OCD, depression, anxiety is a big one. Poor gut health. I mean, I can't even tell you how many patients have come into our clinic with really poor gut health, irritable bowel syndrome or Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis or just gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, cramping. And they think that they're battling an allergy. They think that they're allergic to something, but I blow that out of the water really quickly in the first minute that I talk to them, because I say, well, what are you allergic to? And they'll say, well, I'm allergic to a gluten. I say, okay. Have you ever eaten gluten and not had a reaction? And they say, well, yeah, sometimes I eat it and I don't have a reaction. And sometimes I have a really severe reaction. And I say, well, okay, well, right there, you're not allergic to gluten. because allergies are consistent. You're not allergic to gluten on Monday morning, unallergic to it on Wednesday afternoon, and then re-allergic to it on Saturday. So the challenge is for these people is, well, then what is it? Why can I eat the same thing on Monday and I'm fine, and I eat the exact same thing on Wednesday and I blow up like a tick? Because it has nothing to do with allergies. It has everything to do with the absence of raw material in your body, not allowing your gut motility, the speed of your gut, to operate properly. So if you lack the suite of B vitamins, pyridoxine, riboflavin, thiamine, niacin, pantothenic acid, and 2 key light metals, zinc and magnesium, if you're clinically deficient in these nutrients, then your gut motility is not operating properly. The speed of your gut is interrupted. And when the speed of our gut changes, we get the symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome, gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, cramping, irritability. But it's related to when we eat, but it's not related to what we eat, because it has nothing to do with allergies and sensitivities. And people that are listening right now know exactly what I'm talking about, because there are people listening right now that are going, oh my God, I didn't realize that sometimes I eat that and I don't get a reaction, and sometimes I eat it and I do have a reaction. So I'm actually not allergic. So maybe I should find out if my body's missing these raw materials, put these raw materials into the body, and see if my motility returns to normal and my gut issues eviscerate.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to take you up on your offer. You said when you give talks, you ask the audience to name a condition, and one of the most common, and what I in my experience to be, one of the most, because it's so widespread, also one of the most harmful, is the disruption to sleep patterns that comes from, I think, both from issues of tech addiction, but also from EMF exposure from technology. And there's disruptions to the endocrine system and melatonin production that are linked to EMF exposure. So sleep deprivation or improper sleep or unhealthy sleep, it seems to me to be an incredibly widespread issue. And it's also
normal.
Yeah. And it's also really important because that's when your body's supposed to be healing and preparing for the next day. And so it's super widespread. It's super harmful. I know there could be multiple causes, but if someone was watching you give your talk, you asked that question and I yelled out, sleep disruption, what can I do to improve my sleep?
Okay, so two things are at the root of most poor sleep. And the first one, I'm actually going to start with a question and then I'm going to answer it. Because I've scantily had a physician, like a family practitioner or even a sleep apnea physician that has been able to adequately answer this question. Why is it that people that are the most exhausted sleep the worst? Why is it that people that are the most exhausted sleep the worst? Because you would think that somebody that's exhausted, the only thing they do well is sleep.
But what if they're exhausted because they're not sleeping well?
Well, they're exhausted because they're not sleeping well, but what is the reason that they're not sleeping and the reason that they're exhausted? They're linked to the exact same thing. We talked about it a few minutes ago on the podcast. It's related to blood oxygen. If you are hypoxic, meaning your blood is very poor at carrying oxygen, you are going to be exhausted because the definition of anemia is low oxygen in the blood. The definition of exhaustion is low levels of oxygen in the blood. So if you have low levels of oxygen in the blood, you're hypoxic, and by definition, you're exhausted. Well, let's talk about what happens when you go to sleep. So first of all, I want you to know that your brain is actually very primal. It's not as sophisticated as we think. It's very primal, and its number one concern is survival. And survival means adequate levels of blood oxygen. So there's nothing that your brain will not do to maintain adequate levels of oxygen in your blood. Nothing. And so what happens when you start to go into a deep delta wave of sleep? As you start to get deeper and deeper into sleep, you start to respire more shallowly. You start to breathe more shallow. And if you're breathing very shallow and your respiration rate slows down, you're bringing less oxygen into your bloodstream. When you bring less oxygen into the bloodstream and you're already low on blood oxygen, your brain panics. And what does it do? It wakes you up. Well, how does it wake you up? It pulses cortisol. So people that are exhausted cannot get into a delta wave of sleep because their brain is pulsing cortisol all night. They look like a bouncing rubber ball going down a hallway. Like, they're boing right out of delta wave of sleep, and they bounce into alpha, beta, deep into delta, and they bounce right down the hallway. And it's sad because then what they do is they go to their doctor and they say, "Hey, doc, I can't sleep." And the doctor says, "Okay, well, here's some zolpidem nitrate or diazepam or, Valium or Xanax or what have you." And we give them that quote unquote sleep medication, which actually doesn't help you sleep at all. What it does is it blindfolds your brain's view of blood oxygen. And when your brain can't see blood oxygen anymore, it allows you to get into a delta wave of sleep, but you're not sleeping, you're actually suffocating. And this is why people that take sleep medication will wake up the next day and say, "You know what? I really hate taking Tylenol PM because I'm groggy in the morning. It's still in my system the next day." That's not true. The Tylenol PM has been out of your system for hours. You are feeling the effects of having suffocated for 6 hours.
Wow.
You've been hypoxic for 6 hours. The raw material that you're missing in energy and sleep is blood oxygen. So the first thing I look at or first thing our clinical team looks at for our patients is their blood oxygen level. How well are you carrying oxygen?
Is this the same type of blood oxygen that I could measure just with one of those finger monitors you can get at CVS, or is it more in depth than that?
It's much more in depth because that's measuring the oxygen saturation. So that's telling you how much oxygen is within the cell. But you want to know, how many cells do I have? Okay. In other words, if I'm low on the number of cells, that's an issue, right? If I'm low on red blood cells, it doesn't matter that there's a lot of oxygen in them. I have very few of them, and because I have very few of them, I'm now deficient in oxygen.
Understood. So are there, and I understand, just going to a lab and getting the blood work done, that's the first critical step because you need that dashboard, you need the baseline, you need to see what the stats are. Are there ways that people can monitor any aspect of the types of indicators that you study as important to health? Are there ways for people to measure and monitor any of those for themselves at home? Or is going to a lab just the only way really to move forward with this type of treatment regimen?
Well, going to a lab is the only way to get your red blood cell count done. You need to actually draw blood in order to see your red blood cell count. But there's a second and even more common issue with sleep, and it has to do with our genes. There is a gene called COMT, COMT. It's capital C, capital O, capital M, capital T. This gene codes for the process of quieting the mind. And the second category of sleep people that are listening to this podcast, you'll find that they have one of two types of sleep patterns. They either go to bed exhausted and they have a hard time falling asleep because their mind keeps them awake. And their mind keeps them awake with little innocuous thoughts, not life-changing thoughts, not things that deserve to keep you up in the middle of the night, like loss of a loved one or something demonstrative like that. Little tiny nagging thoughts like, did I get everything on my grocery list today? Did I return those emails? Does my belt match my shoes? Little nagging things like that. And what happens is they lay in bed, and as their environment quiets, their mind wakes up. So why is their mind waking up? And by the way, the second type of sleep pattern is that they fall asleep and then they wake up multiple times throughout the night with the same thing, just little innocuous thoughts running through their head. And again, these are not the kind of thoughts that should keep them awake at night. And so why is my mind awake when my environment's quiet? Because you lack raw material. And generally the raw material that you lack in order to quiet your mind are three things: magnesium, theanine, and melatonin. Magnesium, theanine, and melatonin. And it doesn't take much melatonin at all. 2 to 3 milligrams of melatonin is plenty. And magnesium and theanine in that combination supplies the deficit created by this gene and allows the mind to quiet. You see, most people actually don't have a sleep issue. They have an issue falling asleep and staying asleep because the mind is just active. And that has to do with raw material.
So I mean, that's super, I mean, it's just super interesting stuff. But I know I've had you here for a while, and I want to be respectful of your time and let you get on with your day. So, but before we wrap up, I was wondering, again, I understand that, for people to really take advantage of what you're talking about, what you're outlining, and it's a super compelling vision, I have to say, that they have to, take the steps, get the lab work, and understand the baselines and what the status of all their raw materials is and so forth. But for someone who's listening right now, or anyone, who happens to come across this, right? Are there like a handful, maybe 3 things that you see so commonly?
Few things that they can do.
Yeah, 3 actionable things that someone could do, right now to improve their health based off of what you've been outlining.
Absolutely. I'll give you 3 things that you can do, and I do these religiously every day of my life. If you do these, you will not only add significant time to your lifespan, but you will improve your health span in the most demonstrative way imaginable. So most of what we talked about, I didn't get a chance to go deep into the science, but most of what we talked about had a connection to oxygen, right? And remember, we said that hypoxia is how every human being on the face of this earth eventually meets their demise. So oxygen is so important to emotion and our mood that if we learn how to breathe in the first few minutes of the day, we will not only elevate our mood and our emotional state, it will stay there for hours upon hours. So one of the most impactful things that you can do are these 3 things. 6 days a week, I want you to breathe for 8 minutes, and I'm going to give you a specific breathing technique. It's the Wim Hof Breathing Technique. This is free. You can download it off the internet. Lots of people have heard of Wim Hof. He's the father of modern breath work. There's a Netflix and Discovery show special on him about all the just absolutely mind-numbingly phenomenal things that he's done just by properly learning how to breathe. But if you breathe for 8 minutes every morning, apply a thermal stress and apply a physical stress to your body. You see, aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort. I'll say that again. Aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort. The more aggressively we seek comfort, the faster we age. You see, we associate stress with negativity in the human body, and nothing could be further from the truth. Stress is one of the healthiest things that you can apply to the body. If you don't load your bones, they will not strengthen. If you don't tear a muscle, it will not grow. And if you don't challenge your immune system, it will weaken. This is precisely why areas that have the highest mask mandates and the most restrictive residential quarantines and the most oppressive social distancing requirements actually have the highest infectious rates. How is that possible? It's because those people have the weakest immune system. So every day of your life, if you wake up and you challenge your body, you will improve its resiliency. And so I would encourage everybody to download the Wim Hof, WIMHOFF breathing method. It takes 8 minutes. It will actually change the oxygen tension in your tissue. Not only will it change the oxygen tension in your tissue, but understand that every elevated emotional state that a human being can experience, oxygen is a core component of that state. So in other words, all of the best emotional states, passion, elation, joy, arousal, libido, all the hell yeah, I won the lottery emotions, all of those emotional states, they all require oxygen. This is why no human being has ever woken up laughing. It is impossible to wake up laughing. It's true.
Yeah, I never thought of it, but yeah, I've never done that.
Why?
Yeah,
because happiness is such an elevated emotional state. It requires so much oxygen that we're not capable of experiencing happiness when we're in deep sleep. So when we wake up, we can't be laughing. Now, we can wake up angry, right? You could be dead asleep and I can pinch you and you could instantly wake up angry. You'd be like, oh, what the heck? You have very readily accessible emotions like anger because they require no oxygen. So breathe for 8 minutes every day. And then I want you to apply a physical stress. My preference is weight-bearing exercise or weight training. Weight training, hands down, crushes cardiovascular exercise in every biophysiologic study on the planet. I don't even know why people do cardiovascular exercise unless they're actually training for a marathon or a specific event. But by loading your bones and tearing your muscles, you strengthen the biome. You cause your bones to call for calcium. You cause your muscles to call for proteins. And then the last thing is to apply a thermal stress. And I cannot stress the significance of this enough. Either a cold stress or a hot stress. 15 to 20 minutes in an infrared or dry sauna, or 10 minutes in an ice cold bath, or 10 minutes in an ice cold shower. And the reason for this is that your liver right now, as you sit and listen to this, has two types of reserve proteins. They're called heat shock proteins and cold shock proteins. These are amazing. Google them when this podcast is over, and your mind will just be blown.
Yeah, actually, I'm sorry. My father's work was all largely about heat shock proteins and the response that they have to exposure to EMF.
Wow, that's phenomenal. I'm happy to hear that. They have a very positive response on EMFs.
Yeah, well, his work showed that they have a response to EMF exposure, so that was an indicator. That was one of the first indicators he found that the body interprets EMF as a stressor.
Stress, no question. No, that's what I mean. They have a positive, meaning they
right.
appear.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not positive as in yay, positive as in sorry. Sometimes they get very scientific, but yes, the body treats that as a stressor. But the nice thing is, heat shock proteins and cold shock proteins will scour the body of free radical oxidation. They will quadruple the rate of protein synthesis. Quadruple the rate of protein synthesis. So imagine that you work out and then you apply a thermal stress, and you're now quadrupling the rate of protein synthesis. So you're healing at 4 times the rate. And you express a very specific type of survival gene called a sirtuin. So every day you have free access to these proteins. And we can dump them into our bloodstream, and we can scour our bloodstream of free radical oxidation. We can increase the rate of protein synthesis. We can rid our body of inflammation, and it's all free, and it's all easy, and it's all accessible. You just have to be willing to deal with the hot or the cold. But because we don't like to be uncomfortable, then we don't put our body under those types of stressors.
No, that was really eye-opening. And not only was it eye-opening, it was actually motivational. Like, it made me want to go take an ice-cold shower right this second. But that was really illuminating list of 3 action steps.
If you want to be high on your own supply, do 3 rounds of Wim Hof breathing, a good 25 or 30-minute weight workout, and then get in an ice-cold plunge for about 3, 4, 5 minutes and get out. Your mood will be elevated for 6 hours. It is uncanny what happens when you dump that kind of physiology into the human biome.
Wow. So I will get started on this. I'll let you know the results. I just have one last question here, and I don't know if you really have any answer for it, but I mean, based on everything you're saying and based on your experience working, I don't know if you actually worked as an actuary or you worked around actuaries, but estimating duration of human life, and you have these views on what optimal health looks like. I mean, how long should humans live for?
Well, there are people walking this earth today that are easily going to live to 140. Easily. There are people alive right now today that will easily live into their 140s because we're learning to harness the true power of the human body through things like intermittent fasting, caloric restriction, ketogenic dieting, applying thermal stresses, breathing. So these biohacks, if you will, are extending life in magnanimous ways. And we're also learning to turn all of what we've learned in modern medicine and modern nutrition right upside down on its head. Because the worst advice that was ever given on the face of the earth was that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I mean, the longest study on longevity ever conducted on the face of the earth boiled down to one sentence, and it was, if you want to add 7 years to your life, stop eating breakfast. Right? Because digestion is the most distracting thing to the human body. Why? Because digestion equals survival. So your body assigns a very high priority to digestion, which means that the second you eat, your body will stop doing everything else that it's doing. And usually when we eat, our body is in the middle of repairing, regenerating, eliminating waste, detoxifying, or regenerating. And we shut that process down so that we can take in a little bit of food. And the second worst piece of advice was to eat small meals more often. That is horrific for longevity and awful for health, because as you constantly feed your body, it constantly assigns that a priority, and it doesn't detoxify. It doesn't eliminate waste. It doesn't repair. It doesn't regenerate. It doesn't do the types of things that cells are required to do in order to operate in a healthy environment. So by giving your body the time to focus on those core competencies and eating in a restricted window, you're not only extending your lifespan, but you're also extending your health span.
Wow. Well, Gary Brecka, this has been just an amazing interview. I've learned so much. For everyone listening, again, you can learn more about Gary, and as we covered, you don't need to be in Naples, Florida to take advantage of this learning and this knowledge and these health services. You can learn more at streamlinemedicalgroup.com. That's all one word, streamlinemedicalgroup.com, and that'll be in the show notes. And Gary, just thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to help educate my audience.
And I also do a lot of teaching on Instagram, so they can follow me at Gary Brecka. It's just at GaryBrecka. All I do is teach on Instagram. I talk about sleep, depression, anxiety, emotions, gut health, optimal performance. I handle a lot of celebrities and athletes and professional athletes that everyone on this podcast would know. And I do the same thing for them that I do for every other client of mine. So I readily share that information on Instagram.
Excellent. I just loaded your profile now. We'll make sure I'm going to follow you, Shield Your Body. And we'll make sure to put that profile link in our show notes as well. So really, thank you so much. Thank you for the work you do, and really good luck spreading this message.
Thank you so much.
It's just
I really
super helpful.
You. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. It's been a pleasure sharing the day with you guys, and I hope that you feel it was beneficial, because it's my life's passion, and I'm going to do this every day for the balance of my adult lifetime.
Which sounds like it'll be at least another century.
Yep, another 30, 40 years. I'll keep it up.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Wow, that interview was just kind of mind-blowing to me. Talking to Gary was just thrilling, and I was gaining energy. I felt like I was getting just by talking with him. As always, I'm joined by my right-hand lady and operations manager at Shield Your Body, Stephanie. Stephanie, what, are you kind of blown away by that as I was?
There was a lot. There's a lot of information. And there's a lot, it gives me a lot of homework, because I want to dig into everything that he's talking about.
Yeah.
And again, super quotable guy, absence of vitamin D3 is the presence of poor immune function. I got the chills when he said that. Just chills.
Or there's a superhuman locked inside of all of us. I friggin' love that.
Yeah, I felt that from time to time.
So, and like you said, there was a lot in there. It's going to be really hard to narrow it down to 3 things I learned because there was just so much. I already said, actually, the third one from my list. There's a superhuman locked inside of all of us. That quote is going to stick with me forever. It is a really powerful way. I found it to be a really powerful way of thinking about health and our potential. What did that one stand out to you, Stephanie, or did you have a different favorite one? You just talked about.
Well, no, I really appreciate the quote, and as he's discussing it, I believe him. You know what I mean? Like, I believe. I bought in 100%, because he's also discussing health in a way that I completely appreciate. He's discussing the raw material, giving your body what it needs to work the way it's supposed to work and the way it wants to work. And I appreciated that because it's a different approach than I've heard. People will say take a more holistic approach or whatever, but he's literally talking about, and I'm going to misquote him, but his practice is to take an issue and investigate it all the way down to the deepest root, to the tallest leaf of the tree.
Yeah.
And that framing was, it again, gave me chills because it makes so much sense. And when he can break something down like sleep disturbance and tell you, what's missing, that's really impactful.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that alone would have made a great interview. But stepping beyond that, his way of using this, the term he uses, raw materials, that approach, using that to treat addiction was sort of mind blowing to me, right? Because we talk about tech addiction a lot at SYB. We've talked to a hypnotherapist earlier in this season about tech addiction, and that was a great conversation as well. But the way that Gary was talking basically about using food and nutrients as an approach to addiction, that I'd never thought of it I've just never thought of treating addiction in those terms before.
That was a really powerful part of the interview as well. We have discussed tech addiction in earlier in the season, and the reoccurring theme is dopamine, and it was the way he expressed another approach to dealing with tech addiction and addiction in general was also really powerful.
So the final thing I want to point out is just his 3 actionable steps. I mean, everyone this season is giving some actionable steps, and they're all great. But his made me actually want to go out and buy a sauna and pump some iron first thing in the morning, and then jump in the sauna. It was I was really motivated by his actionable steps.
One of his key points, one of the many amazing key points, I should say, is that lack of oxygen in our bloodstream has a huge impact on us, of course. So, it makes perfect sense that, part of his first actionable tip is to download and practice the Wim Hof Breathing Technique. And then I really appreciate, as somebody who loves to lift weights, that the focus on weightlifting in the morning. And I also love that he bashed doing cardio, because I absolutely hate doing cardio. And now I have an excuse not to. And the 15-minute cold bath, or was it 20 minutes hot? So anyways, giving a thermal response, a thermal stressor, right in the morning, and don't eat breakfast. I think don't eat breakfast, I think, was like a bonus tip, but I really appreciated how easy for me, I think those actionable steps are. And I think if we just practice the breathing, we're gonna the breathing technique, I think people will see a big change in the day. Maybe they don't feel like weightlifting or skipping breakfast or cold baths, but breathing is obviously important.
Yeah, no, totally. So, okay, everyone, remember to check out Gary's website at streamlinemedicalgroup.com and his super popular Instagram account at Gary Brecka. Both links are in the show notes. If you like this show and want to hear more, please remember to subscribe to this podcast, the Healthier Tech Podcast, available on all major podcasting platforms. And if you have a moment, please also leave a review. Reviews are critical to help more people find this podcast and learn about the important and undercover topics that we cover. And you can also learn more and sign up for our mailing list to get notified when we have new interviews, webinars, ebooks, and sales at shieldyourbody.com. That's shieldyourbody, all one word.com. You can also just click that link in the show notes. Until next time, I'm Art Blank, and I want to thank you so much for tuning into the Healthier Tech Podcast. And always remember to shield your body.